Story number 1. Among the branches of a relentless winter, my once serene home became the stage for a chilling siege. The house, a sturdy structure that had weathered decades of storms and celebrations, suddenly felt as delicate as glass under the weight of unwelcome shadows. It began innocuously enough, with a faint scratching at the windows and whispers carried on the wind, a harbinger of the nightmare that was to unfurl.
One frigid evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the frost-bitten garden, I noticed figures lurking at the boundary of my property. Cloaked in the twilight, they moved with purposeful stealth, encircling my home like predators stalking their prey.
At first, I convinced myself it was a trick of the light, or perhaps my imagination running wild. But as the days passed, their presence became impossible to ignore. They made their intentions known on a night when the moon hung low, a silver eye witnessing the terror about to unfold. The squatters, for they could only be described as such given their intrusive occupation of my property, approached my home with a boldness that sent shivers down my spine. Their faces were obscured by the darkness, but their message was clear. They wanted my home, and they were willing to force me out to claim it as their own. The following days were a blur of fear and confrontation. I would wake to find them inside my house, standing at the foot of my bed, silent sentinels delivering a silent ultimatum. My possessions were moved, hidden, or broken, a psychological warfare intended to fray my nerves and break my will. They whispered threats through the walls, voices as cold as the winter air, promising that leaving was my only escape from their torment. In desperation, I sought help, but the squatters were like phantoms, vanishing whenever anyone else drew near, only to return with the night. The police found no evidence of their trespasses, and friends and family urged me to abandon the house, to save myself from the unseen forces bent on my expulsion. As the final act of their harrowing campaign, they set the house ablaze one night, flames licking the sky, a beacon of my defeat. I watched from the street, surrounded by the flashing lights of emergency vehicles, as my home and sanctuary succumbed to the fire. The squatters had won, their shadowy forms visible for just a moment in the inferno, a haunting image of victory. I was left with nothing but the ashes of my past and the haunting realization that some battles are invisible, fought against adversaries that thrive in the darkness, coveting what we hold dear. My home was no longer mine, claimed by forces that operated beyond the realm of reason, leaving me a wanderer in search of a new sanctuary, forever wary of the shadows that lurk just beyond the light. Story number 2. On an unremarkable day in October, marked only by the steady fall of leaves, my tranquil existence was breached by an unforeseen nightmare. It began with faint disturbances, whispers carried on the wind, and shadows that flitted just beyond the edge of sight. Initially dismissed as the byproducts of the season, these anomalies soon coalesced into a tangible threat. The arrival of an old, decrepit van at the edge of my property, shrouded in the gloom of an autumn evening. The van, with its windows obscured and sides adorned with indecipherable graffiti, became an unwelcome fixture at the end of my driveway. Attempts to discern the intentions of its occupants were met with silence, a void that seemed to swallow my inquiries whole. Law enforcement was of little help. Their hands were tied by the intricacies of property laws and the absence of overt hostility. As days bled into nights, the presence of the squatters began to insinuate itself into the very fabric of my home. Objects were misplaced, unsettling noises in the dead of night, and an ever-present feeling of being watched turned my sanctuary into a prison of paranoia. The boundary between my world and theirs was eroding, leaving me exposed to an invasion not just of property, but of peace. Driven to my limit, I devised a plan not of confrontation, but of cunning. Recognizing that direct engagement had only emboldened them, I sought to outmaneuver the squatters. I began by installing motion-sensitive lights around my property, illuminating the night and robbing them of the cover of darkness. Surveillance cameras followed their unblinking eyes, a silent sentinel against further intrusion. But the stroke that tipped the scales involved reclaiming the narrative of my own home. I circulated a letter among my neighbors, detailing the situation and calling for a unified front. Together, we petitioned for increased patrols in our area and organized nightly watches, a community bound by mutual protection. The turning point came when I employed an unexpected ally, the local news. Interest in the story of a neighborhood banding together to reclaim their peace from unwelcome squatters caught the attention of the media. The spotlight, it seemed, was anathema to the invaders. Under the scrutiny of the public eye, and faced with the prospect of legal action, buoyed by community support and documented evidence, the squatters withdrew. One morning, as subtly as they had arrived, they were gone. The van, the source of so much distress, vanished, leaving behind only the scars of its presence. In its absence, a tentative peace returned, a peace tempered by the ordeal we had endured. The battle for my home had been fought not with threats or violence, but with strategy, community, and the power of visibility. It was a testament to the strength of collective action and the resilience of those determined to protect their sanctuaries from the shadows that seek to encroach upon them. Story number 3. After a week-long business trip abroad, I returned home, weary from travel and longing for the familiar comfort of my own space. The journey had been fruitful, yet exhausting, and all I could think of as the taxi meandered through the streets was the quiet solitude that awaited me. However, as the car pulled into the driveway of my suburban home, a sense of unease crept over me. The front door stood ajar, a silent herald of the chaos I was about to discover. Stepping inside, the air felt different, thicker, charged, with an energy that was foreign to the serene home I had left behind. Sounds of life emanated from within. The distant murmur of voices, the clatter of dishes. I moved cautiously, a stranger in my own home, as I encountered the first of the squatters. They were everywhere, inhabiting the rooms with an air of casual permanence, their belongings mingling with mine in an unsettling portrait of cohabitation. Confusion gave way to anger as I demanded explanations, only to be met with dismissive glares and mumbled justifications. They spoke of eviction notices and locks changed, of a week that had transformed my home into a refuge for the displaced. My absence had been their opportunity, the house a vessel for their desperation. As the reality of the situation sank in, I realized that confrontation would not reclaim the sanctuary I had lost. The police, when called, offered little immediate solace, caught in the complexities of laws that protected even those who had trespassed into my life. In a shift towards a more strategic approach, devoid of compassion for the squatter's plight and focused solely on reclaiming my property, I turned to the nuanced intricacies of the law and psychological maneuvering. Understanding that a direct and aggressive confrontation could entangle me in legal complexities, I decided on a method that was both clever and indirectly forceful, exploiting a loophole in the squatters' knowledge and perception of their situation. I began by meticulously documenting every interaction, gathering evidence of their occupancy without permission. Then, with the assistance of a lawyer, I crafted a series of official-looking but ultimately non-binding eviction notices and legal warnings, citing fabricated yet plausible sounding statutes that hinted at severe consequences for their continued trespassing. These documents were designed to intimidate, leveraging the squatters' likely lack of legal knowledge and fear of criminal charges. Simultaneously, I employed a private security firm to begin patrolling the property at irregular intervals. The guards were instructed not to engage directly with the squatters, but to be conspicuously present, taking notes and photos, creating an atmosphere of surveillance and impending action. This presence served to underscore the seriousness of the fabricated legal threats, adding a layer of psychological pressure. To further unsettle the squatters and disrupt their sense of safety and community within the house, I utilized a technical approach. I cut off utilities intermittently under the guise of legal property maintenance, making their stay increasingly uncomfortable. Additionally, I played recordings of construction noise at all hours, creating the illusion that a major renovation was imminent, further implying that staying would become untenable. Confronted with what seemed like a mounting legal and physical siege against their presence, and facing the discomfort and instability of their living conditions, the squatters began to doubt the sustainability of their occupation. The constant pressure, combined with the fear of legal repercussions and the deteriorating living environment, gradually eroded their resolve. One by one, they began to leave, seeking less precarious situations elsewhere, unwilling to risk the consequences of staying. In the end, the house stood empty once more, the squatters driven out not by direct conflict or compassion, but by a strategic campaign designed to exploit their vulnerabilities and fears. While the victory was mine, the silence that followed was a stark reminder of the lengths to which I had gone to reclaim my space. The house was mine again, but the echo of the tactics I employed lingered, a testament to the cold calculation required to expel the unwanted occupants. Story number 4. In the heart of an unseasonably cold autumn, when the leaves whispered secrets on the wind, an unsettling chill settled over my home. It was not the kind that could be warded off with blankets or a lit fireplace. This was a cold that seemed to seep into your very soul, leaving an imprint of dread. My house, a modest 2-story affair at the end of a cul-de-sac, had always been my sanctuary, a place of solace and warmth. That was until the morning I awoke to find an inexplicable, ominous sight in my backyard. A tent, tattered and gray, as if it had materialized from the mists of an old, forgotten world. I first noticed it on a Saturday, the sun casting long shadows across the lawn. There, in the furthest corner of my garden, was the tent, so out of place, yet seemingly at home among the autumn decay. My initial confusion quickly spiraled into unease. I had not seen or heard anyone arrive, and there had been no indication that anyone had trespassed onto my property. Approaching it felt like walking through a thick, tangible dread that clung to my skin. As I neared the tent, the sound of whispers floated through the air, soft, indistinct, almost melodic, yet chilling to the core. It was then that I saw them, a couple, emerging from the shadows of the tent. Their appearances were jarring. They were clothed in garments that seemed woven from the night itself, their eyes deep wells of despair and longing. They spoke in tongues I could not understand, their voices a symphony of sorrow and darkness. I retreated to my house, the door slamming shut behind me, a barrier against the unknown. But the presence of the squatters was a poison, seeping through the walls, tainting the air with an otherworldly chill. Nights became sleepless ordeals, plagued by nightmares of shadows encroaching, of whispers that turned into screams. My home no longer belonged to me. It had become a domain of despair, held in the grasp of those who had claimed my backyard as their own. The climax of this harrowing invasion came one stormy night when the boundary between our worlds thinned to a mere whisper. Thunder rumbled like the growling of an ancient beast, lightning casting brief, stark illumination. I found myself drawn to the window, compelled by a force beyond my understanding, only to see the couple standing outside the tent, their arms raised to the tumultuous sky, chanting in a fervor that sent waves of terror crashing through me. I knew then that this was no ordinary squatter situation. It was an encroachment of a realm beyond my comprehension, a horror story played out in the sanctuary of my backyard. The morning after the storm, the tent was gone, as mysteriously as it had appeared, leaving no trace of the couple's existence. But the chill remained a ghost of their presence, a reminder of the night when the barrier between worlds was breached. In the aftermath, my home felt hollow, a shell haunted by the memory of its uninvited guests. I was left with a tale too implausible to tell, a horror story that had become my reality. The world seemed a shade darker, the wind carrying whispers of realms untold, of visitors from beyond the veil who might, one day, return. Story number 5. In the heart of a harsh winter, when each breath turned to mist and the world seemed wrapped in a shroud of silence, my tranquil existence was shattered. My home, a quaint cottage nestled at the edge of a sleepy town, became the target of an unwelcome presence. It began subtly, with misplaced items and the faint sound of footsteps in the dead of night, but escalated into a confrontation that would test the very limits of my resolve. One evening, as shadows stretched across the snow-blanketed ground, I noticed a figure lurking near the tree line, tall and gaunt, with eyes that seemed to reflect the moonlight. The squatter did not attempt to hide their intentions. It was clear they sought to claim my sanctuary as their own, to expel me from the warmth of my hearth. Days turned into a siege. I would wake to find windows ajar, letting in the icy chill, or messages scrawled in the frost on the glass, each one a veiled threat. At night I could hear them moving about, a whisper of malice in the quiet. Despite the police finding no evidence and friends suggesting I leave for my safety, I stood firm. This was my home, my refuge, and I would not be driven from it by fear. Determined to confront my tormentor, I devised a plan. Utilizing my knowledge of the land and the house, I secured every entry with locks and cameras, turning my home into a fortress. I left lights on, music playing, anything to give the impression of a house constantly under watch. And then I waited. The squatters' boldness grew, their attempts more desperate and reckless. One night, under the veil of a storm that blanketed the world in white, they made their move. The air filled with the sound of their attempts to force entry. But I was ready. The police, alerted by the cameras, arrived to find the squatter caught in the act, their desperation to claim my home their undoing. In the aftermath, as the storm passed and peace returned to my corner of the world, I realized that the ordeal had not just been about protecting a place of bricks and mortar. It was about defending my right to peace, to a life unmarred by the shadows of fear. The squatter, now a ghost of the past, had underestimated the strength of someone fighting for their home. I emerged from the winter stronger, with a newfound resilience. My home, once besieged, stood as a testament to the victory of will over malice. And as spring breathed new life into the world, I knew that no matter what shadows may come, my light would always shine brighter.